From the moment it appeared less than a century ago, no piece of battlefield technology has left its track marks on history like the tank. It has slugged it out in every major conflict of the 20th and 21st century and shows no sign of leaving the ring. But which tanks are the greatest? To find out, we canvassed some of the world's greatest tank experts. They include Tom Clancy, world-class novelist, tank fan, and military observer.
War is about killing people and breaking things. It ain't the Olympics, it's not supposed to be fair out there.
Bruce Dickinson, frontman from rock outfit Iron Maiden and amateur tank driver.
Once you've driven 20 yards, you really don't want to stop till you get to Berlin.
And billionaire tank collector, Jacques Littlefield.
I have about 220 vehicles, of which 65 or so are actual tanks.
And from the sharp end of the tank business, we have war vets.
It was very similar to just getting out in the dirt and having a nice time.
And the war-torn.
Oh, this is love. The tank is about love.
Now sit back and brace yourselves. The top 10 greatest ever tanks and the technology that makes them mighty. We all know what a tank looks like. It looks like a Sherman. We all know what a tank does. It does what a Sherman does. The number 10 greatest ever tank is the 33-ton fantasy tank that we recognize from newsreels, comic books, and Hollywood movies.
I would definitely be someone who'd say I think the Sherman tank is one of the greatest tanks ever made.
The M4 Sherman is the tank that won the Second World War for the Allies.
In total, nearly 50,000 Shermans were built, and the greatest ever reunited one of the survivors with 3 veterans for whom the Sherman became their wartime home. Because during the Allied campaign in Normandy, when these men were still teenagers, they trusted their lives to Sherman's state-of-the-art technology.
I haven't driven one of these for 60 years, but I'm willing to have a go. I'm Brian Carpenter. I was a driver on a Sherman tank.
I'm Nobby Clark and I was a gunner.
My name is Ken Tout. I commanded one of these Sherman tanks.
Making its debut in the Western Desert Campaign 1942, the American M4 Sherman soon became the ubiquitous Allied tank.
The Brits have them, the Canadians have them, the French have them, the Russians have them, the Chinese have them, and it manages to perform everywhere.
We were impressed by the size of it, by the efficiency of it. The guns operated beautifully.
Excellent, yeah. The gun in particular, 75mm.
Very much more accurate, and a larger shell, which meant that we could shoot at bigger animals.
Had to have a good gun, had to have good armor, but its main key was mobility. It had to be able to get fast into the enemy rear and exploit that breakthrough.
It was so fast and so easy to drive, and it's a lovely ride, almost as good as being in a modern motor car.
It's no surprise the Shermans drove like a car. They were built by the mighty US motor industry.
The Sherman tank design was driven from the beginning by its producibility. The Allies thought that we were going to have to outproduce the Axis, so they were built by places like Baldwin Locomotive Works, by General Motors, by Pacific Car and Foundry.
They were produced in vast quantities. For every sort of contemporary German tank, the Americans were delivering about 10 Shermans.
The Sherman design was really a universal tank that was intended to be used by a largely citizen army. It needed to be operated by somebody who knew how to run a farm tractor, by somebody who could drive a truck.
And you couldn't have got any greener than Brian Carpenter, a college student before he became a tank driver.
And I've got the 2 steering levers between my knees, and I've got a clutch pedal and an accelerator pedal, and of course the steering levers act as the brake.
Standardization is the key. It's only really in the engine that these tanks differ. This one, and others like it, had a 9-cylinder air-cooled radial, actually an aircraft engine.
I didn't think an aero-type engine was perhaps all that suitable for a slow-moving vehicle like a tank. But of course everything was low-geared, and at full revs in bottom gear, it would only do 2 miles an hour. And in top gear, 5th gear, it would do 22 miles an hour. But you needed to be on a nice, smooth, level road a bit downhill, otherwise it wouldn't take it.
The Sherman tank offered some unexpected domestic facilities when the lads were out and about.
We didn't have any laundry, so you had to wash your own clothes. And the only way you could dry your clothes was that you have an exhaust at the back, which you switch the engine on and you can dry your laundry very quickly.
And while you waited for your socks to dry, how about a cup of tea?
You could put a kettle on the top of the exhaust and boil the kettle.
Once you finished your tea and nature called, the Sherman supplied an unorthodox portable toilet. Empty shell cases.
The toilet arrangements, this is where the empty cases come in, you see. If you had an empty case, this is reused, then you could get rid of it.
And best of all, if you were caught short, it was easy to resupply.
And there were times when there were no empty cases, so they pointed the gun in the direction of Germany and got an empty case.
Nice one, Nobby. But the Sherman was much more than an exercise in improvisation. Everything about the tank's design was carefully considered.
The American philosophy was to use the tank as an infantry attack weapon. So the armour is suitable for a vehicle which is highly mobile, has got to keep the enemy on the move, but isn't necessarily slogging it out with other tanks.
But tank-on-tank action was an operational fact of life, and by the time modestly armoured Sherman arrived in Europe in late '42, it found itself on the receiving end from a new generation of German tank killers. And German tank commanders soon got the measure of the Sherman.
I saw them first time when I came to the Western Front. There were no Metros. The very thin armor, easy to hit the armor, to penetrate the armor. This tank, 1,000 meters, the shot went straight through from both sides.
Bad news for Sherman, but that's only the half of it.
And of course, you had 140 gallons of petrol when the tanks were full. And of course, you were penetrated, the petrol went up. That's where they got their name from the Germans as Tommy cookers.
Yeah.
Because they brewed up so easily.
But despite all its flaws, in the end, it was the Sherman's original design considerations that proved decisive.
If we look at the Second World War with hindsight, it's quite obvious that the tank you can mass produce is going to win the war for whichever side.
When we encountered Germans, they didn't come alone. They come, many of them, and then we didn't have a chance.
Marvelous. Brilliant. I never thought I'd do it again.
Just as noisy, yes.
Because I'm older, it's all seemed much harder, like stiffer. But the feel of it was really good. It all sort of came back. Congratulations.
Well done.
It's the art of compromise that makes or breaks a tank, and all the remaining 9 greatest ever have made some tough decisions. Next up is the designer tank that leapt straight from the drawing board into the jungles of Southeast Asia. The Sheridan tank was built to satisfy the wish for an air-liftable tank, a go-anywhere light tank for the weekend. Number 9.
The dream of tank designers for decades has been to develop a tank that's lightweight, easy to transport, but has the firepower of a main battle tank.
This vehicle was unique in that it had more firepower than any other vehicle that you can think of that would be dropped from an airplane.
The transport aircraft flies over the ground at maybe about 100 miles an hour, 10, 20 feet off the ground. The drogue chute comes out, pulls the tank out, it falls to the ground. It's a frightening thing to watch.
This machine you're going to drop into a distant part of the world to fight, let's call it a colonial war. And in the context of 1970s America, that can mean only one place, Vietnam.
I was part of a cavalry unit. We were kind of search and destroy, go out there and don't come back.
Who better to give us the lowdown on the Sheridan than 2 guys who experienced Vietnam from inside the multi-talented tank?
First impression was very positive. It did a lot of neat things. It could be airdropped. It floated. All you could see through the window was water and fish.
The Animal M551 Sheridan, my connection, driver. Tricycle steering, 4 forward speeds, 2 reverse. The manual said 43 miles an hour, but yeah, I think it could get more closer to 45, 46. If you hit the rice paddy dikes just right, you could actually get it to float, and you could hear it slap when it hit the ground.
The sensational cross-country performance of Sheridan was down to one thing: armor anorexia. Every aspect of the tank is calorie controlled.
As soon as you start talking weight that's light enough to be dropped out of an airplane, you're talking about a tank that's going to have to be around 10 tons or 15 tons. And it's very difficult to do that with conventional steel armor.
The only way Sheridan was going to stay in one piece was if it was made out of aluminium.
For a given level of armor protection, you could get a much better structure that is something able to withstand the rigors of airdrop.
And the requirement for heavy firepower on such a skinny frame led to the Sheridan's most striking feature.
It has an amazing looking gun, a 152 caliber gun that fires missiles.
It would follow an infrared beam, probably similar to a laser beam today. But it left the gun tube, and you swear it almost hit the ground. And it would fishtail all over the place, but it never missed the target.
The same fat barrel was used to fire conventional rounds too. Pretty exciting in ultra-lightweight Sheridan.
This weighed 17 tons. When you fired it, all hell broke loose. Lift the whole front end of the tank right off the ground. Hopefully you had a helmet on sometimes because your head would be knocked around inside the turret. I mean, it really was a kick.
But the bouncy recoil created more than a headache.
If you fired the conventional round, the recoil would knock out of alignment the electrical systems that would fire the missiles.
As well as a ruptured missile system, another potential problem was the aluminium armor didn't offer much protection against, well, anything. And the Sheridan was stuffed with ammunition.
The driver's surrounded by ammunition on both sides. Then you have them stacked on the floor, L 28 rounds.
No smoking in the driver's hole, please. No smoking in the tank, actually. Try to keep any sparks away from the ammunition, or you'd lose your home.
It's kind of the Swiss Army knife of combat vehicles. That is, it could do everything kind of okay, but nothing really very well.
One of the things they tried to do with the Sheridan was to look at opposite design requirements. You needed mobility, but you had to have it air droppable. It had to be able to swim. It had to be able to fire a missile. So it really does a very good job of putting all these things together. Granted, they're all compromises, but you end up with a vehicle that does have capabilities that was unlike anything else available at the time.
To qualify for the list of greatest ever tanks, imagination counts for something, but it's performance that rocks out. And the Sheridan couldn't put its metal where its mouth was. Our next battle tank could not be accused of such underachievement. From the outset of World War II, Germany demonstrated ruthless tactical superiority and engineering excellence in its tank warfare. The Nazis created an armored force to which the Allies had no answer, and made it their business to stay one step ahead. In 1943, German tank technology found its ultimate expression in the Panther, 8th greatest ever tank. This is the last remaining operational Panther in the world, and the greatest ever brought this Panther veteran face to face with the big cat he commanded over 60 years ago.
This thing is from outside in perfect shape. It couldn't be any better. You know, I could hear it and smell it again, you know. That's exciting, very exciting.
The Panther was a big shock for the U.S. Army and for the British Army. It's an upsurge or evolution in tank design compared to everything that had preceded it. The single most important feature on the Panther was its firepower. It had a superb gun. The long 75mm gun that the Panther introduced was probably the best all-around tank gun of World War II.
Okay, move!
The Panther gun was purpose-designed as an anti-tank weapon. It achieved its power not by going to a larger caliber, but by going to a longer barrel and a larger powder charge.
The gun itself, it's a very long barrel, and the size of the barrel is important because the longer the shot is in the barrel, the higher the speed, the higher the muzzle velocity.
Like every other Panther commander, Wolfgang Sterner was impressed by the awesome power of the gun.
You can destroy with this thing an enemy tank broadside at 2,000 meters without any problem. Any tank. It has an excellent cross-country mobility. Excellent. This suspension we had, if you go over a bump, you see how the road wheels are going up and down, you know? And that inside you have a relatively smooth ride. Other things, your brake comes off, you know, if you go fast.
Keeping Wolfgang's brains in order was down to the Panther's running gear.
This is the Panther suspension. What we see here is 8 road wheel stations. The innovation on this tank was to have large road wheels for low rolling resistance, but interleave them so that they could be placed close enough together to evenly distribute the weight. So as we go down here, what we see is alternating pairs of 2 together, 2 far apart, 2 together, 2 far apart.
The Panther's original design came as a result of Germany's experiences on the Eastern Front. In 1941, German tank tactics fell apart when they encountered a new breed of Russian tank, which they were horrified to discover was much better than their own. Shamelessly, the German response to their new foe was to copy it, and the first thing they nicked was its sloping armor.
This type of tank is the first tank we had in Germany with a sloped armor. This armor has a size of about 80 millimeters, but due to the slope, it has a protection ability of 100 millimeters. Because if you get a front hit, it bounces off.
Not satisfied to merely copy the Soviet tank, the Panther design aimed to improve on it.
As we look at the front of the tank, you may notice this rough appearance. This is not shoddy workmanship. What this is a pretty sophisticated piece of countermine technology. It was a paste that was troweled on, purposely troweled rough. It was then hardened with a blowtorch, and its purpose was to provide standoff from magnetically attached mines.
The improvements didn't stop with the armor. The Germans took pride in giving the tank a complete engineering makeover.
Whereas a mechanism in a Russian tank might weigh 100 pounds to do a particular job, the Germans could take that 100 pounds and get it down to maybe 70 pounds. Here you have the casting for the engine block for the Panther. And as you can see here from looking at it, this is an incredibly intricate casting. It's got lots of thin sections. It's been very carefully engineered so that I would say a comparable Russian or American unit to this would be heavier and larger. It might be somewhat more rugged, but this is designed so it's right there on the edge, just very beautifully built and designed. They would do things in a manner that was better, but sometimes was very complex.
So the command comes now, Panzer Marsch, go.
The complicated Panther saw its first action at the Battle of Kursk, the biggest and meanest tank battle of World War II. But from the off, things started to go wrong.
Most tanks broke down before seeing any action. They were not ready for combat. They were much too early to brought to the front. It was not a very impressive situation, the first.
The problem with the complex engineering was not only that it was prone to failure, it also wasted precious time and resources.
These are the main bearings for the Maybach V12 engine that powered the Panther. They're a beautiful piece of engineering. They're designed to last for years. The problem was the Panther lasted weeks or months in combat, and it's one of the reasons that the Germans lost the war. They just couldn't back off from engineering excellence in every aspect of their weapons.
The German national character seeks too greatly after perfection, when perfection is not only not needed, but it's counterproductive.
It's said that if Germany hadn't gone overboard with the engineering and built simpler tanks in larger numbers, the war could have had a different result. Still 1-0, but to the other side. So whichever way you look at it, this tank rightly deserves its ranking at number 8. Overtaking the stationary Panther is a machine that if it didn't exist, we'd have to make it up. If Satan produced a tank, it would be the T-72, 7th greatest ever tank. The 70s was when the gulf between Soviet and Western ideologies seemed to be at its widest. And the symbol of Ruski threat was the T-72 tank.
The T-72 is a tank that was built by the Soviets to fight World War III.
The T-72 was designed to form the spearhead of a Soviet push into Western Europe. The ultimate attack tank.
The T-72 was definitely something to be worried about. It had thick armor, good mobility, a big gun, and a very low profile.
It's about a foot lower than a British tank and about 18 inches lower than the contemporary American tank. So it's a difficult target to hit, especially if it's coming at you fast in great numbers, fully tracks up with infantry behind it.
Ooh, well, that sounds pretty exciting.
You look at the T-72, it's wide, it's squat, it's got a big gun. And when you're driving it, you actually feel aggressive. It just wants to get up and go. You feel part of the tank. and it's fun to drive.
The biggest surprise that we had with the T-72 actually was its gun, which was a 125mm caliber gun. And that would have caused us big problems.
The Soviet barrel was 5mm wider than Western barrels, and that meant bigger shells and more armor penetration. But the revolutionary bit was that the gun was fed shells by an automatic loading system.
The big green lump is the back of the gun, which is also coupled to an autoloader. Right. The ammunition comes up through these two flaps in the floor, which is lifted up to about here. Rammer comes out of the back of the turret, pushes the warhead in. With having an autoloader, you don't need the loader, which means you can reduce the size of the tank. You can make the tank smaller, which is a harder target to hit.
Removing a crew member immediately reduced the weight of the tank by about 12 tons, the weight of the armor needed to protect a crewman. This increased the tank's speed and maneuverability. But the T-72 went further, shrinking the interior so that even the remaining crew had to be specially selected.
If you're taller than 5'6", about here, my wife's taller than that, you can't fit inside a T-72. It's Munchkin land, all right?
The T-72 seemed to fit perfectly into the Western stereotype of the Soviet tank, a brutal, efficient killing machine. But was T-72 really all it was cracked up to be?
Intelligence officers are scared for a living. The intelligence officer looks at a piece of Soviet hardware and goes, oh my God, the Russians have finally figured it out. That's the deadliest thing on the battlefield. We're screwed if we have to go against it. Then we get hold of it. We find it's a death trap like everything else the Russians ever built.
For starters, there's the trusty autoloader.
It has an unfortunate habit of trying to stuff the gunner into the gun.
It wouldn't be unknown for the crew members to lose their arms with the autoloader, picking up the sleeves and trying to ram that in the gun rather than the shell.
But there's much worse. T-72 has its ammunition exposed, and it means that very often, if it's struck with the right sort of incoming round, the whole tank will blow up.
It's a death machine, death for its own crew.
The likelihood that the crews of the T-72 feared the tank almost as much as the Pentagon did has got to count against it in the great scheme of things. T-72 makes it to number 7. While mutually assured destruction was making everyone miserable on both sides of the Iron Curtain, the loved-up Swedes tried to find a way to reform the image of the tank as an instrument of peace. The unique S-tank comes in as the 6th greatest ever tank, the pacifist choice. When the tank world first saw the S-tank, they collectively shook their heads in disbelief.
I think S-tank astounded everyone. It is so unlike the conventional tank that it was bound to have people's chins dropping for a while when they got to terms with it.
The S-tank is one of the goofier ideas that's come down the pike in the past 50 years.
It caused us to rethink what is a tank and what is the essence of a tank.
From its turretless snout to its protective fence, twin engines, and built-in swimming skirt, the S-tank is quite simply unique. And its audacity surprised even the Swedes.
Well, I was shocked when I first saw it because I haven't seen that kind of tank before. I was the first soldier in the Swedish army on the S-tank in '62.
The greatest ever went to Sweden to find out what all the fuss was about.
If we look at Sweden, it's a neutral country, and it's caught between the Warsaw Pact on one hand and NATO on the other. So it needs a posture of robust defence so that no one's going to invade it.
I think S-tank is designed for an attack by Russia swinging north about and down through Sweden.
To even the most casual observer, the S-tank has one particularly striking feature: no turret.
It was intended to fight in forested terrain. Narrow forest roads don't lend themselves to a fully turreted design. There's perhaps not even room to swing the gun around. So the first thing the Swedes said was, perhaps I don't even need a turret.
The absence of a turret makes the S-tank just over 7 feet tall. Very handy if your main tactic is concealment.
An S-tank had this ability to literally dig itself a hole. All you'd see sticking over the top is the gun barrel, hardly anything more. It was designed to shoot and scoot. Under onslaught from large numbers of enemy tanks, you can take a few out. You can then roar off in the opposite direction, dig yourself in again.
In battle conditions, the S-tank would be buttoned up, all the crew protected inside the tank. But when the greatest ever were in town, posing no obvious threat, everyone could stand up and have a good look around. Extra eyes for the driver.
It's very easy to drive, and even fun. If you're driving on the road, say about 50-55 kilometers per hour, you can turn around 180 degrees in less than a second, if you're good enough.
It's more like the inside of a fighter aircraft than anything else, in that you're literally using the controls on a stem, everything, right at the edge of your fingertips.
One of the S-tank's most astonishing concepts is the reverse driver. It's his job to drive the tank in reverse after it's taken a pop at a Russian tank column.
You want to keep the gun and the armor still able to engage the enemy. You didn't want to turn the tank around. A solution, therefore, was a rear-facing third crew member. But he had a duplicate set of driving controls which faced to the rear. The tank could, in fact, drive as rapidly and as easily backward as it could forward.
But the jewel in the crown of the S-tank is its unapologetic main weapon, the fixed gun.
Well, the whole problem with a fixed gun is that you've got to manipulate the whole tank to fire.
You had to be able to aim the whole hull in the same way a fighter pilot aims his whole aircraft. The design breakthrough was a controllable hydropneumatic suspension. The Swedish innovation was to be able to control these in such a way and in such precision that they could be used as a gun aiming device.
To tilt the gun, the first and fourth pairs of road wheels move relative to the other wheels. Because the length of the track is fixed, it means that the tank has to tilt up and down.
What you can see here is the arm that the first road wheel is connected with. And that one moves when you move the hull.
The elegant and sophisticated S-tank was feted by the world's military. They loved it, but nobody bought it.
It was intended to fight a Russian army on Swedish terrain using Swedish army tactics. It was so well tailored to that mission that, in fact, it wasn't a very good fit for anybody else in the world.
In particular, there was one insurmountable problem.
The disadvantage of the tank is that you have to stand still when you're firing.
Because the hydraulics are shared by the suspension and the aiming system, the gun cannot be fired while the tank is moving, making it less versatile than other tanks. The S-tank was doomed to 6th place. To get into the top 5 greatest ever tanks, you can't just sit around on your borders. You've got to be prepared to go and kick ass. You've got to expose yourself. And for that sort of thing, you can't beat the British. Our first 5 favourite tanks were expecting trouble on a grand scale. But if your intentions are more modest, which tank offers the best value for money? Centurion, 5th greatest ever. First seeing action in the closing days of World War II, the Centurion is the longest-serving main battle tank in the world. A favourite of cut-price armies in low-budget wars.
From the early 50s, right through to the turn of this century, you'd find Centurion in a battle somewhere.
It was the best tank in the world for a good 15 years.
Colonel John Gilman has spent his entire career at the heart of British tank development, and the Centurion was his first love.
But when I joined my regiment way back in 1968, my first vehicle was a Mark 62 Centurion, very like this vehicle here. And we drove it for 3,500 miles, which is an awful long way.
And Colonel Gilman knows better than anyone that the key to success for any tank is battlefield maintenance.
The crew can keep this vehicle in the field fighting. The whole vehicle was designed from the crew point of view around 2 spanners. One was the 45, teeny-weeny spanner, and one was for the track adjusting nut on the front. And between those two, there aren't any other spanners virtually you need.
Centurion's common sense approach extended to a unique method for hitting the target.
The ranging machine gun is absolutely ingenious. It's linked to the main gun, so it means that a gunner simply has to fire 3 rounds of tracer from the machine gun, and when one of them strikes, the target is picked up at once by the main gun and you get a first-round hit.
It's a very easy tank to get into and turn the engine on. It's just like a car. But then the nightmare begins. Second gear. If you think back 60 years to motor cars, this is a crash gearbox. So you have to match the revs absolutely and double the clutch going up and down at the same time.
Despite Colonel Gilman's 30 years of experience with the intricacies of the crash gearbox, the Centurion still puts up a fight.
It's like learning to ride a bicycle backwards.
The Centurion may be a bit of a handful, but it's the fuel economy that really hurts.
You're talking going cross country at least 5 gallons a mile. 5 gallons a mile. It gives you across country about a 40-mile range before you start getting worried and have to refuel.
You don't have to have everything great on a tank, but if it goes fast, it's manoeuvrable, it can blow up other tanks and not be blown up itself, that's a pretty good tank.
If you're in combat in this vehicle, you're highly likely to survive. You're going to win.
In a world that seems to crave bells and whistles, the Centurion remains true to its principles. Keep it simple, stupid. With the handling characteristics of a mule and a range of only 45 miles on a tank of fuel, Centurion makes it to only number 5. In 1970, finding itself without a friend in the world and surrounded by irate neighbors, the Israeli Defense Force decided to create a tank of its own. At number 4, Merkava, the DIY tank. From the mountains of the Golan Heights to the urbanized Gaza Strip, Israel faces a unique set of defensive demands.
The Merkava is a very successful vehicle because it does two things. It can fight in close urban combat, but it can also do the traditional job of a tank and fight in open country on the Golan Heights. The Merkava is a creature of Israel.
Usually when you design tank, you have to compromise between firepower, protection, and maneuverability. In our case, protection, the survivability, is the most important thing.
Survivability is a big issue for a country with a population smaller than London's and a conscript army made up of both men and women.
My name's Eleanor Kushner. I'm a tank instructor here in the School of Armed Forces. I teach soldiers how to be drivers, actually. This is my favorite part of the tank, the power unit. The engine and the transmission together in the front of the tank. That's why the tank is called a Merkava, which means in Hebrew chariot. Just like horses were in the front of the chariot, they were the power unit of the chariot. So is the engine and the transmission a power unit of the tank. Now, if a shell hits the tank, it would hit the power unit and not the people that work in the tank. The driver that sits over here is moved to the side. I don't want to sit in the middle, right in the front where a shell can hit me. I'd rather sit on the side. See perfectly well where I'm going without having shells hitting me. I have the whole desert for myself when I'm driving tanks. It's an amazing feeling. I mean, you can go so fast and it's just a monster. It's this powerful monster.
One of the things that makes the Merkava so unusual is that it's in a continuous state of evolution, reacting to the unique requirements of the Israeli army.
According to our experience, there are a lot of small innovations in order to make the tank and the suspension suitable for area like the Golan Heights, especially. The area is very rocky.
The unique spiral spring suspension on the Merkava has increased its efficiency by allowing the springs to separate completely from the running gear when it goes over a particularly big bump.
The arm of the road wheel is not connected to the spring. When it goes down, it disconnects, goes by gravity down.
The tank free falls back onto the suspension arm. This increased travel makes for a much more pleasant ride.
The suspension is also taking part in protecting the vehicle. As you can see, it covers most of the side of the tank.
The tank was developed virtually in a combat situation. This is quite exceptional. All those lessons that are learned on the battlefield are streaming in while the thing's being designed.
Well, another thing is these chains. They're called Se'arot Shulamit, which means in Hebrew the hairs of Shulamit, which is a girl's name. The most vulnerable point in the tank is where the turret and the hull meet. So what these chains do is that if a shell hits them, they just change the whole course of the shell so that a shell won't hit in the most vulnerable point of the tank. Because a tank without a turret or a hull, it's not worth a lot much.
And with the engine at the front, there's space in the back for some friends.
Another thing that I'm really excited about is the fact that you have loads of room now in the tank. You can have parties in this thing now. You can have the whole unit go into the tank, move around, have some drinks, have something to eat. It's a lot of fun, and it helps a lot because now that you have room, you can operate much better.
It can carry a section of infantry in the back. That makes it unique amongst tanks, in that you've got an armoured personnel carrier and a tank rolled into one. Now, I don't know of another tank that's that versatile.
So why isn't everybody driving Mercs across the deserts and high streets of the world's trouble spots?
You've got to bear in mind it's designed for use in Israel, and you don't have to worry about the need for airlift capability. It is a big, heavy vehicle. Ideal for Israel, yes, but for an expeditionary force, too big, too heavy.
Some people would beg to differ.
This is the best tank in the world. Nothing will stop this tank from driving. If it wants to go on, it will go on. And if it finds a target, I don't want to be there in that target instead of you.
I won't argue with that. Our number 3 greatest ever tank didn't just go back to the drawing board. T-34 invented it.
This is 100% the best tank in World War II.
It was just one of those breakthroughs in weapons design that happens only once a generation.
The T-34 is the tank that won the Great Patriotic War for the Soviet Union. It incorporates innovation, but with the lowest common denominator. So you get a rough and ready design that you can mass produce.
The whole essence of the Russian military philosophy was that if you were a peasant from the fields, you should just be able to jump in it and just get on with it and drive it. As you can see, I'm only one step removed from a peasant. Oh, no!
The greatest ever put the reputation of the T-34 to the test by giving rock star Bruce Dickinson a ride in his very own Iron Maiden.
What I love about tanks is the fact that it's an individual combat. It's almost like a fighter pilot, except it's on the ground. And also the way in which different tanks and gunnery systems evolved to counter the advances in technology. That's what I found attractive about tanks.
The star qualities of the T-34 tank begin with its characteristic shape. T-34 invented sloping armour, which in turn affected other parts of the design.
Well, one of the real innovations in the T-34 was the weapon. This thing uses a 76mm gun at a time when most other tanks had much smaller guns. They thought, we have to have a weapon that's strong enough to defeat a tank that's armored as well as our own T-34. So they basically designed the gun to be as efficient as the armor.
A very thick cast turret, very simple construction. It's sand molded, and you can still see the mold marks on it. And it's wartime, why make it look pretty? If it works, use it and start killing people with it.
The T-34's extraordinary qualities were put under pressure when Germany tried to push eastwards in 1941. In the long and bloody confrontation on the Eastern Front, T-34 became recognized as the premier tank of its day.
T-34 was the best tank at that time. He was the ideal compromise of armor protection, firepower, and cross-country maneuverability. That was the best tank, period. All other tanks were far behind that.
Powering this vehicle is a V12 diesel, old diesel airship engine from the First World War. 6 cylinders on the left, 6 on the right, and a fuel injection pump in between. Very simple, very lightweight, and very easy to maintain. These were manufactured basically from the 1920s right up until the present day.
Right step forward. Right step forward.
The T-34 may have been a great weapon, but it was a horrible tank to serve in. When you have a big 450 horsepower engine immediately behind you, bolted straight to the floor, all that vibration gets passed through the metal, up your legs. It's very unpleasant inside of it.
I'd say so far of all the tracked type vehicles I've ever driven, this one is the most fun and the filthiest, which is the same thing, really.
T-34 transformed Russia from a peasant economy to a superpower. A tank capable of that deserves some respect. T-34, third greatest ever tank. The penultimate greatest ever tank has so many bells and whistles that no tank in its right mind would pick a fight with it. The Abrams has to go looking for trouble. Number 2.
The tank is big, it's very well protected, it's extremely fast, and has a darn good gun.
It's just a stunning piece of technology. It's scary to think how much better it is than tanks were one generation ago.
A single Abrams can take on one or more of any other tank on the battlefield and still win.
The M1 Abrams, you have a Rolls-Royce of modern tanks that's seen the Americans through several wars.
I was hit in the side, the front, and the rear. Right in this particular area right here is where I was shot. We went downtown Baghdad knowing that we could be shot at from above. We were being fired at by heavy machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades. I mean, rocket-propelled grenades are designed to destroy vehicles.
Rocket-propelled grenades are tremendously destructive weapons, able to burn through up to 30 inches of steel armor. But the Abrams tank is covered with a new generation of laminate armor, lightweight, and more than capable of dealing with an RPG. Its top-secret composition saved Lieutenant Montgomery's life.
The first hit actually hit right in this area. It exploded, took out my 50 caliber machine gun, as well as all the ammunition that I had stowed here. This is where I was standing. The hatch was actually down in what we call open protect. And that's when he fired. The tank did exactly what it was supposed to do, absorb the impact. Yeah, it was a good shot, but it was the last thing he ever did. The tank from behind me shot him.
But the Abrams is much more than an armored shell.
The M1 is designed to be user-friendly and enemy-averse. It's got a fire control system that I call I Wish He Was Dead. Theoretically, in less than 5 minutes, an M1A2 Abrams can kill off an entire battalion of its enemy.
Keeping the 68-ton Abrams moving is a 1,500 horsepower jet engine.
Take the governor off the engine, the M1 tank will go over 70 miles an hour.
Once you get on it, it'll take a couple seconds for it to kick in, but once it does, it feels like, I mean, there's nothing that's going to stop you until you put the foot on the brake.
The use of an aircraft jet engine has been a source of controversy ever since the Abrams first visited a gas station.
The M1A1 has approximately 504 gallons on a full tank, and it gets about a half a gallon for every mile. It takes approximately 8 gallons to start the engine, which is quite a bit.
I just think it's absolutely barking mad putting a gas turbine engine on a tank. It's the most incredibly thirsty engine on the planet. I mean, you need an oil refinery following the darn thing up the road to Basra.
Fuel economy aside, the jet engine also creates a superheated exhaust.
If, of course, you've got a great big jet efflux going out the back like a little blowtorch, well, you know, you're going to get yourself a heat-seeking missile straight up your jacksie. Not very nice.
Despite such quibbles, the fact remains that Abrams is a heavyweight message that tank warfare is alive and kicking in the 21st century.
2003 will be the last time anybody even thinks about tangling with the United States military in a set-piece battle.
Watch this space. From 10 down to number 2, we've seen them spit and bite, we've seen them swim and snarl, we've even seen a tank fly. But now, time to reveal the tank that ranks number 1 in the greatest ever, after the break. 9 came close, but when it comes to the greatest ever tank, there can be only one. Germany had been banned from making tanks after World War II. They just hadn't played nice with the ones they'd had. But by the 1970s, a new Germany was allowed back into the tank shed, and the technological excellence that created the Panther spawned a new generation of big cat. Leopard, the greatest ever tank.
It's an excellent machine. You compare it with other tanks, and you'll see that it's smaller, lighter, and faster. I think it's the best combination of firepower and mobility on the planet at the moment.
The perfect tank, it's got to be mobile, it's got to be armor protected, it's got to have firepower. Leo 2 does all those in spades. It's an excellent tank.
Maybe German engineering, but the Leopard 2 is a statement of European identity.
It is a combination of the best firepower, the best protection, and the best mobility in the world today.
Leopard 2 must be a contender for one of the greatest tanks ever.
Not just a contender, Leopard is the greatest ever tank. And here in Sweden, 280 Leopards prowl the countryside. After the demise of the S-tank, Sweden abandoned making its own tank and went shopping for a replacement. The German Leopard knocked the spots off the competition. But would you let your 18-year-old kid take it out of the garage?
My name's Johnson. I'm the driver. I'm the commander. My name is Christian Jansson.
My name is Chaz Kelly. I'm the gunner.
My name is Josef Rosen, and I'm the loader of this tank. I'm also the chef.
The greatest ever joined these Swedish Army conscripts as they began an 11-day combat exercise, getting to know the Leopard's world-class technology.
6 months ago, they left home for military service. And probably they had never been driven a tank before.
They've swapped the family Volvo for 62 tons of killing machine. And it's the Leopard's world-beating user-friendliness that lets these youths tear up the tundra with confidence. No steering levers or crash gearboxes here.
It's almost like driving a car, but it's a bit heavier. Today, we are gonna drive like maniacs.
The steering wheel looks like a car steering wheel. The seat here, very comfortable to sit in. A sports car type of seat, produced by Recaro. Very simple compartment, looks quite much as a car. A big white pedal in the middle, that's the brake. You can stop 62.5 tons in about 9 meters.
We are gonna drive the tank to its bitter end. I will make them feel confidence with this tank. The attitude is to get them to be hunters, to feel the tank.
The extraordinary performance of the Leopard is enhanced by its radical modular design. It's actually an enormous kit of parts, all easily replaceable. And just like your Mercedes, when something goes wrong, you don't reach for your wrench, you grab your laptop.
For my maintenance, I have a laptop. I connect it to the separate modules, and I can test them individually. So what I'm going to do now is to plug in this cable to the central logistics, and then I plug it into the maintenance computer, and I can see what's wrong with the tank. And then I change that module. So you could say that this computer is like the normal test computer on a modern car. But for instance, if you should have a problem with the power unit, you take the whole unit out, you take the units to the workshop, you get a new unit instead, put that in, the tank is ready. And the rest...
The Leopard's engine is another world-beating factor. Nothing new or fangled, just massive and reliable.
This engine is quite common industrial engine and marine engine as well. The engine has about 1,500 horsepower, a V12 engine, 48 liters, and 15 times more torque than a normal car.
If you're worried that treating the Leopard like a giant skateboard is going to bust the tank, fear not.
The Leopard is one of the few tanks in the world that comes with a manufacturer's guarantee.
As long as the factory supervise your maintenance, then you're okay for a good 14,000 kilometers, which in tank terms is an awful long way.
To help stop the conscripts from running into each other, the Swedes use a state-of-the-art tank command control system. It's an elaborate version of the system taxi firms use to check on their drivers.
And I just move around this map. Of course, I can center the map on my own tank or on somebody else's tank. That's no problem at all. And I can also broadcast anything they want in text or icons.
It's innovations like this that keep the Leopard one step ahead of the pack. Because by keeping most information on the screens and off the normal radio system, they can keep radio conversation focused on the important things.
Almost 100% of the radio talk now is about the enemy, as it should be. I just need to find the enemy and go kill him.
That's fighting talk. The greatest ever decided it was time to put the world-beating performance of the Leopard to the test against the local champion, a Volvo, over a treacherous 400-meter slalom course. With the greatest ever tank, it's not only about winning, it's about destruction. So there you have it, the top 10 greatest ever tanks, each with its own unique character, but sharing the same grim intention. From the moment they first stumbled across no man's land, the Iron Cavalry created mechanized warfare in its own image. The tank has become the face of war. Be afraid, be very afraid.